Welcome to Inversion Building Blocks. This is a 5-part series designed to help build strength, flexibility, and alignment for your inversion practice. Welcome to Inversion Building Blocks, mid-body. We're going to begin by talking about 4 common cues you often hear when referencing an inversion and how they all kind of go together. And those cues are to cinch the ribs or tuck the ribs, navel to spine or belly button to spine, and tuck the tailbone. And banana back, no banana back. So what do these mean, and what do they have to do with one another? The best way to do this, let's start with the tailbone, is to show how one thing affects the rest of the body. So if I have an anterior tilt here, my tailbone is flaring, and if I take my tailbone and I tuck it under, what happens? It draws my belly in. And by doing that, tucking the tailbone, drawing the belly in, it also draws the ribs in. And this all happens because we're using the pelvic floor, the transverse abdominis, often referred to as your corset muscle. So we're activating all of these muscles to link together and help bring everything in. So if we tuck the tailbone, it draws the belly button in and draws the ribs in. So if my arms are up in a handstand, then the action would look like this. And what happens when you do that? We stack our joints. We go from here, the banana back, so that's why that one's related to all these cues, to, and the pelvis can now stack over the shoulders. Okay, so to practice strengthening and lengthening this area of the body, we want to come into tabletop position, hands below the shoulders, knees below the hips, and we're gonna run through cat-cow. Now I know you guys have all done cat-cow, but I really want you to focus on the action of the tailbone and how it transcends to the rest of the body. So begin by that anterior tilt, flaring of the tailbone, and notice what it does with the spine, and eventually your sternum needs to lift and you look up. And then let's reverse that action beginning with the tailbone. So tuck the tailbone. And it draws the belly up. And the ribs. So we're really using this cat-cow to focus on how those actions really affect one another and link together. Now let's come back to neutral by using those cues. Tuck the tailbone, draw the belly button to the spine, cinch the ribs in. Nice. And what this does is this creates, with the action of, like we were talking about in the upper body, the scapula's spreading, wrapping around the side body, and with the tailbone tucking the belly button to spine and the ribs drawing in with these actions, what it does is it creates a hollow body. So the hollow body, it's the difference of if you were handstanding like you were a straight piece of thin paper versus if you were a rounded paper. You would stand more easily. So it's this distribution of body weight and stabilization that creates a more stable center of gravity overall. So, since we're talking about the hollow body, why don't we just go ahead and get on to our backs and come into that hollow body position, often referred to as low boat, low navasana. So here we're tucking the tailbone, drawing the navel to the spine, ribs move in. There's that rounding of the upper back, plugging the femurs in the hip socket, but we don't need to really talk about it too much yet. But we are going to use that in this low boat position. And let's rock side to side. rocking the boat, noticing all of these actions, how linked they are, how much they depend on one another to keep stable and strong. Nice, and then release, hug the knees in. And we're gonna rock up, place our hands on the ground. And if you have a crow pose in your practice, this is another great way to really access the contraction of these areas of the core. You start to really play with the other areas of the body we've already talked about, the upper body, and now really involve the core. So pull that belly button to the spine, tailbone is tucked, draw the ribs in, and release. You can come back down onto the sit bones, and why don't we just take a full boat pose, Navasana, because obviously that's really good for our core as well. And if I had to pick one exercise to really get your core in shape for inversions, it would definitely be this low boat, this hollow body position right here. Okay, come on up. So let's also talk about the bandhas and how they assist us in our inversions. The Udab Bonda, so this is kind of our lifting muscle, the abdominal lock, helps us with suctioning the stomach contents up and under the ribs. And then our Mula Bandha, our root lock, is what helps us lock in the pelvic floor. And all of these actions together are creating that wholeness, right? That's what we're moving towards, is one solid whole structure of the body. And to be able to lock in our bandhas is going to help lock in the core, lock in the pelvic floor, and create that whole body structure. A really good way to practice activating your Udab Bonda in an inversion is in downward facing dog. And maybe you've even felt it a little there when you're in downward facing dog, and it feels like a suctioning of the belly button towards the core, where your stomach contents are going up and under the ribs, and you can feel that suctioning happen. And it's a great way to practice is in downward facing dog and paying special attention to that area of the body, trying to access it, because you really have to feel it and practice it to have it become second nature, especially to be able to apply it to an inversion so you don't have to think too hard about it when you're already upside down. Okay, so the other area, now that we've started talking about the Mula Bandha and that root lock, we want to discuss here is the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is an important stabilizer for the core and to the pelvis. And so that links the core and the pelvis together nicely, right? And the transverse abdominis up to the rib cage. So we've got, again, this blending happening. So a strong pelvic floor is crucial to this whole body experience. We're going to go through some drills to activate the pelvic floor. So come onto your back and lower all the way down. I think with any exercise you're doing, when you commit to that lower back being grounded, being secure to the mat below you, then you're going to be doing work on your pelvic floor. So let's begin by knees above the hips, shins parallel to the ground below you, hands above the shoulders, shoulder width apart. And then again, focus on that belly button to spine, the lower back being glued to the mat below you. Most important thing, the tailbone is tucking, and draw the ribs in. Nice, solid core. Lower back on the ground, lower back on the ground. Okay, and we're gonna hover opposite limbs, so right hand and the left leg start to extend. Come to a hover, check in. Check in, is that low back on the mat? Inhale back to center. Left hand, right foot. Back to center. Whole time, we're really trying to activate all those cues at the same time. You can always put a towel, a thin towel, underneath your lower back and give it a tug to make sure that you're really securing the low back to the mat below you. It's a good way to test out. Just check it every now and then and make sure that you're still fully keeping the lower back glued to the floor below you. Okay, bring the heels down, set them down, hip width apart behind the sit bones. Gonna go into some bridge pulses, really using the pelvic floor. Again, don't activate the glutes, use the pelvic floor, and when you lift the tailbone into the air and then vertebrae at a time to follow, really lift from the pelvic floor. So think about this really low abdominal area and it lifting in the air by a string. So let's inhale. Lifting, lifting, lifting. At the top, push through the feet, activate the quads, expand the chest, long neck, and then exhale, one vertebrae at a time. Now on this next inhale, as you're pulling with the pelvic floor, lifting with the pelvic floor, we're gonna inhale, so we're pulling the breath in, right? Down through the nose, down the back of the throat. It's this pulling action. It's slightly constricted, so pulling the breath in. And as we do so, I want you to pull the belly button to the spine. So root through the pelvic floor and lift using the pelvis and the pelvic floor. And then pull that breath in. And as you pull that breath in, pull the belly button to the spine. Here we go. So exhale and inhale. Again, inhale. And exhale. And you can almost start to feel maybe that Udab Bonda, that abdominal lock, as you really actively think of pulling the breath in and pulling the belly button to the spine. So let's try that a couple more times, really focusing there, not clenching the glutes, lifting with the pelvic floor, and pulling that belly button to the spine as we pull the breath in. Nice job. Draw the knees into the chest, rock back and forth, or side to side, rather. And then we can rock back and forth and all the way up. We're gonna come to standing. And we're gonna practice this pelvic floor exercise that I like to refer to as the boomerang jogger. That might make sense to you in a second. So first we're gonna bring our feet to about hip width apart. And then we're going to draw the chest in, belly button to spine, tuck the pelvis, really root through the pelvic floor. Then we bend the legs, but they're still side by side. The left leg comes up on the balls of the foot, and we're gonna move that leg back and forth without compromising the rest of the body, really quickly. See, I'm a boomerang jogger. You can keep a hand on the belly to make sure that you're really rooting through the pelvic floor. And that's good. And walk that out a little bit. And then we'll do the other side. Okay, on the balls of the right foot, and boomerang. Don't laugh, keep the core engaged. You should feel it. If you put your hand on your lower abdominals, you should feel things pretty tight. My arms got confused there. And that's pretty good. Okay, shake it out. Nice work. Okay, let's come all the way back down. Oh, I gotta finish with the Navasana since we're on the core. One more boat pose for the road. Knees into the chest, roll it back. Roll it forward, tuck the feet under, step back, come onto the knees, and take a child's pose. Nice work. So remember, tuck the tailbone, draw the navel to the spine, draw the ribs in, how all of these actions have something to do with one another. And by doing so, we can prevent that banana back and accomplish that ultimate goal of stacking all the joints, getting that pelvis above the shoulders.